Sorry, I'm late.
We're going live here. And we're live. Welcome everyone to another NPM Open RFC call. Today's date is Wednesday, July the 28th. I've copy and pasted or spammed the chat with the meeting notes doc. Feel free to add yourself as an attendee to that agenda/notes. We'll be following along in the agenda that was actually posted in issue 421 in the NPM RFCs repo, which I'll also link for folks to look at. I apologize for the late creation of that doc. At one point in the future, and at some point in the future, we'll get that actually automated, automatically generating earlier and often. So apologize that just got put together this morning again. As usual, we ask that everybody please abide by the code of conduct that's referenced in the NPM RFCs repo. In general, the general purpose of that is just an acknowledgement of being kind on these calls, and please be respectful. If you'd like to talk when somebody else is, please raise your hand and I'll call on you. And just be mindful of others. Any announcements that folks have on the call that they wanted to share? If not, we'll get going here. The first item that is actually on the agenda is the RFC 182. This is the NPM audit licenses work that Tierney had queued up. I left this on the agenda just to essentially keep it as sort of like a status update. I'm not sure if there's any updates from last week though.
Yeah, I don't think I've changed anything in the last week, but I'm happy to see if I can find some time to poke on continuing down the path of this in the coming weeks.
Cool. So no updates for now. Moving along then, actually, you have a drafted PR, is that right, Tierney?
Yep, I do.
Do you need any help from folks? Like, can we put out like a call for?
I'd love to pair with someone. But yeah, it basically just needs more work. Like the API, the basics are there, and the interface needs to be built out, and like it just needs to be built basically. Sure. So yeah, happy to work on that. If someone else just wants to work on it, you're more than welcome to. Yeah.
Just taking notes here. Moving on then, unless anybody want to offer support or help with that. If not, moving on to PR 418. This is the trust system root certificates. This came in yesterday, so I'm not sure if many folks have been able to review this. I'll share the PR link in chat.
Is Del Tura on the call? Otherwise, I did get a chance to look at this, and I've got to, give a pretty brief overview. It's a completely reasonable request. Basically, what they want is to be able to set a CA file option and still have NPM requests also include the system certificate authority store. The challenge here, I think, is that most of that is not handled within NPM. It's basically just an argument that we pass to the Node HTTP layer. We transform that CA file into an array of CA certificates by reading it and splitting it on the certificate boundaries. And then we just hand that off to Node, and Node does what Node does. there's no, that I'm aware of, there's no cross-platform, straightforward cross-platform way to get the list of all of the system certificates to like include those all by default and pass those to Node. I could be wrong on that. It's been a pretty long time since I looked at any of that stuff. One potential workaround that they have today is they can add their add their custom certificate to their system certificate store in whatever way makes sense for their particular operating system. That's not a great workaround because it doesn't allow you to have like different ones for different projects or things like that. And the current state of the world is that you have to replicate the entire system store within your CA file if you want to be able to also access other remote systems. So yeah, long and short of it here, I think it needs a little bit of investigation just to see like, what would go into that. Is there a way to tell Node to, use these certificate authorities and also your default ones? Potential hazard that I can imagine is it makes it impossible to, it might make it impossible to stop accepting a certificate that is in your system certificate store. So for example, there's a cert that you no longer want to trust because you know that it's been compromised or what have you. There's an easy way right now. If you're, in a project, you can have a CA file for that project that only includes, the certificate authority required for GitHub, for NPM, and for your internal registry and nothing else. I don't know if that's a use case we particularly care about, but that's kind of, I feel like it's a stretch to find a downside with this particular suggestion. It's just the implementation challenge.
Just need to do some research then.
I mean, making it an option instead of by default would also like give you the opt-out mechanism, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we could just like have a, include system certificate store as an option. Then the only challenge is just how do we tell Node that, right? Because I think it's maybe even statically compiled or something. It was once upon a time. Like I said, it's been a very long time since I looked at that.
Okay, so it's Guard, go ahead.
Just trying to remember, I don't think there's a problem, but if I have a package and you've installed my package and I have scripts that run, my npmrc and my package isn't going to apply when those scripts run, right?
Correct. A nested npmrc file in a dependency is never processed, and I think we even
potential
exclude
security
them.
concern I can think of.
But we exclude them from the
they'd
package,
be public keys. Right? They'd be public keys anyway. I mean, the only thing you'd be leaking
I'm just thinking of DNS cache poisoning.
I see.
Right, I can get you to have a bad CA and go to a bad site after I poison your DNS. Like, it's really obtuse, but the vector's there if I can change that setting without you knowing it. Obviously, at the top of a project, that's a different, because I understand that the config is going to be overridden, but not on nested ones. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and even if you did like an npm config set in your script to change it, we've already loaded our config, so I'll poison you for the next install, but not this one. And that's pretty easy to detect. That won't get very far before somebody notices.
Okay, so I put the item down to do a bit more investigation, and then we can post back on the RFC itself, like that this seems like something that's pretty reasonable, like that we could look into. Cool. Any pushback? Immediate pushback? Okay. We'll keep it open then for now. Also, we will poke Emily, I think is her name. Moving on to PR 405. resolve packages based on Node.js version. I will share this link for folks.
So this
Not-
this seems like we could. So my first take on this is if we're going to do this, we could do it just by sort of changing the heuristic for how we select which package version, right? So we could say, you know, if we have to load Mocha 8 or 9, but we're on node 10, then let's prioritize the ones that don't have an engine mismatch, right? So we might still allow it with a warning if there's no other option. If something depends on Mocha 9 and you're on node 10, we'll go ahead and install it and warn you that, like, hey, this is, you know, probably not supported. The thing where that sort of falls down is once Mocha 9 is in your lock file, like we're breaking our contract if we pick 8 instead, right? And so what we don't want to do is say npm install with a lock file will be different on node 10 versus node 12.
So just so I know we're looking at the same thing, and then Alistair, I'll let you jump in. You were speaking to the, oh yeah, 405, sorry, I apologize, I have the wrong tab open. Alistair, feel free to go ahead.
Sure.
Oh, go ahead. There is also one other workaround, which I know some projects are using, which is to set a accept version. So you could say my dependency is Mocha 8, but I will accept Mocha 9, which means if 9 is already there, that counts as a valid resolution. But while building the package tree, I'm only going to require like version 8, but I'll like dedupe against 9. I can try to dig up the link to that feature, but that also is kind of another release valve in some of these cases.
Go ahead, Alistair.
Yeah, no, I was going to say the important thing to keep in mind is people, it might be obvious, I guess, but people don't often use Semver or engines correctly as well in some packages, especially even some of the bigger packages. So you might end up with something crazy going on at times that could get annoying. And if it's just the first install, then it's probably fine. But yeah, I've only literally just seen this, so you know, it just had me thinking. Yeah, that's all. So for example, let me think. If a package, I've seen a lot of stuff recently where people say they only support versions of Node which are LTS, active LTS and higher, and don't document it in their module. So breaking changes could happen throughout. I might be going a little off here, but I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts from where I'm going here. Yeah.
Just to interject, sorry, I know Gar and Wes also have their hands up, but sure. I'll let you finish your thought if you had something else to add, Alistair.
Nothing else to add. I was just throwing it out there. I don't know if it's directly going to impact this. I'm probably going to be fine though. Yeah.
Sure. Gar and then Wes.
Just thinking of the problem it's trying to solve is, and what we run into at NPM all the time, the Node GYP library, where, you know, exactly this problem where we have a contract we have to support in order to update to a new version. It's got a different contract than we have, so we can't update. This wouldn't solve our problem, but I'm hesitant. You know, the initial reaction is to like to try and support every use case, but this is, I don't know if this is allowing people to get themselves down roads they don't need to be in. Either you can update to Mocha 9 or you can't. Like, your dependencies determine your support contract, and that's just kind of how it works. Like, you can't update unless you are also gonna want to support what the new one supports, right? it's unfortunate, and there may not be a solution to that, and then that's where this pain comes from, is because we want to resolve it. But like the resolution of like when people type install, they're going to get a bunch of different things in a land of package locks. It doesn't feel like this is a problem we should or can solve. Thank you.
Wes?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the package support intent versus, in reality, what people put in the engines field. This is what the package maintenance working group was hoping to address with the support specification. Never really landed officially. I don't know if anybody's currently working on it. But there is a gap between intent support and, like this will break when you install it and try to require it. I don't think it's NPM's job today to solve both. I think we need again, I like the support spec. I know there was a lot of question on how deeply it went, and how opinionated it was. So maybe, someday folks can revisit that. And to me, that would be the advisory versus as Tierney said in chat, that it should be part of your, dependency resolution, maybe engine strict by default someday. But I think we need to have some sort of intermediary, which says like, we think this should work, versus where engines is like explicitly saying it does or does not work. So I just want to make sure there's that difference here when we talk about this problem, because I think what they're looking at is unfortunately a little bit of the intent. They think like the intent should be honored. Anyway, I don't know. That's my thoughts.
So next steps here, it sounds like giving some feedback on this in general, though it doesn't sound like something that we would want to support the way that's detailed here.
I mean, it's unfortunate because I think all of us, even myself, have use cases where things would be easier if like if version 4 of a dependency dropped support for node 10 and version 3 didn't. And then I could say 3 or 4 is fine. And then node 10 users and below got version 3 and the others automatically got version 4, right? Like that sounds like a wonderful experience, would solve a lot of problems. Like, it would make maintaining packages much easier for people when their own transitive dependencies, are aggressive with dropping support for platform versions. But because engines, as it currently is so like misused, like it's not consistently specified. It's often specified incorrectly or too broadly. Just because a package says it doesn't work on an engine doesn't mean it doesn't. It just means they don't want to care about that engine usually. And that's not the same thing. And similarly, just because a package says it does work on that engine also doesn't mean that. There's millions probably of packages that say that they work on greater than or equal to node 0.6 because that's the last time they set that. And nobody's tested it since then, but they fail on newer node versions, So it's like, I'm conflicted about arguing against this RFC because it would be so useful, but like I see there are all the reasons why I wouldn't. Sorry, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I guess like if someone's trying to use something that is greater than or equal to node 0.6 on node 12 and it's not going to work on node 12, it's not going to work. Like that's kind of a non-problem. There's already a problem inherent there, and the engines field isn't really preventing that.
Well, right, but there's also just as many packages, if not more, that claim that, and it's true. So you can't automatically assume it's correct, nor can you automatically assume it's incorrect for any engine's value.
And
but isn't this the point of overrides? Like that's the whole point of that feature, right? Is that the application owner can make that decision for their entire tree. So I think if we want to go down the route of discussing whether or not it is helpful for somebody to be able to interject and jump in and say, hey, no, actually, I want that. Like what the correct definition to me is my package JSON says I depend on 3 and above, and the application owner who wants to work on an older node version just has to put in an override that says actually only accept
this is slightly more different. This would like the thing that I think would be like, so let's say I maintain an ESLint plugin and I need a certain dependency for ESLint 6, but I don't need it for ESLint 7. it would be great to be able to say, don't install this if you have ESLint 7, but do install it if you have ESLint 6. Similarly, I have a dependency where version 2 works on ESLint 6, but version 3 works on ESLint 7. And it'd be great to be able to say, if you're on ESLint whatever, or Node whatever, or whatever, install the appropriate version of the dependency. And I say that as a package author because I explicitly don't want my consumers to have to deal with that. And the choices I'm forced with right now are either make them install things that might be unnecessary, do conditional requires, or do breaking changes that I don't otherwise have to make, just to make the dep graph be valid.
So I just wanted to quickly interject. So it does sound like you would still need some sort of conditional spec or schema to provide those variants. And we actually talked about, distributions or variants, variant packages internally, I think over a month ago, when I know Yarn was starting to discuss that as well, that potentially provides like a conditional, basically what you're alluding to, Jordan, based on certain parameters. But Wes, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I still think that the user experience you want can be achieved through other more generic mechanisms that have already been RFC'd out. So for example, one way, and I'm not saying this is the best way or the only way, but one way could be the parent package JSON combined with overrides, right? So say you have a version of your plugin with a combined set of dependencies and specific version requirements that aren't explicitly true about your package in all use cases, but you could, in that regard, you could publish a parent package JSON, right? Like, remember we talked about being able to say the parent comes from a registry spec? So like you could in theory say like, here's the configuration you want to use if you need this to work with old and unsupported Node versions, right? And if you need that, then you go this other route because that's the legacy way anyway. And your newer one would work on LTSs, right? And so yes, you're making your consumers who want to stay on legacy Node versions jump through an extra hoop. But to be honest, like that's probably a good thing, right? Even from the user experience for them, because they know now they've had to opt into this, non-standard world that you don't want to support and Node doesn't want them on, right? So like to me, that might be, that extra hurdle is actually maybe fine, as opposed to adding this feature, which would complicate things for everyone across the board, trying to figure out why that version got installed. And it was because, oops, I ran NVM, use 12 yesterday, just testing something and I forgot. And now my build that was deterministic is now failing and I don't know why, right? And that's a much worse debugging situation than explicitly having people opt into configuration differences because they want to be on older nodes.
Yeah. Isaac, I see your hands up as well as your comment. You could probably just speak for yourself.
So yeah, we do kind of have this heuristic matching based on the engine. So we when we sort the packages and then select kind of the, quote unquote best one, we sort them such that ones that don't match the engine get pushed further down the list. The problem is we skip that whole process of sorting package versions if the dist tag latest version is within the range. Then we just say, okay, you can use the latest one, so I'm going to give you that, because that's kind of like you said, that's your default tag. That's the one that we're going to go fetch. If we just skip that check, we just don't, like we only shorthand to the latest version if the engine is okay for that latest version, then I think like the 80% of this problem goes away, because now, at least on the initial install, when you don't have it in a lock file, you will get, if you install Mocha at 8 or 9 and you're on node 10, you'll get 8 rather than 9. So we really ought to be, like, the intent is there for us to be preferring the one that is allegedly going to work with your current node version, to the extent that we have that information. Now, of course, if it's within a lock file, we're going to give you what's in the lock file. There's no way around that, and that would be breaking a contract to do otherwise, so we're not going to do otherwise. I think that we probably need to surface the accept versions, because that's something that is actually super, super handy. What Mocha could be doing is saying, or like whatever depends on Mocha could say, well, I support Node back to 10. Mocha 9 has come out, which only supports Node 12 and up. I work with 8 or I work with 9. The one correct way to do that would be to say my dependencies is Mocha 8. My accept dependencies is Mocha 9. And so if 9 is already there, fine, cool. You've got a newer Mocha, I'll use that. If 10 comes out, all right, we got to nest something. But the one that's going to be pulled in by me is Mocha 8. And then the third thing is, like Wes said, like this could just be handled with overrides and documentation once we land that feature. So what I really, the thing that's like the, alarm bells and klaxons going off in my brain, which most people on this call probably know exactly what I'm going to say. But for the benefit of anybody new listening to this video on YouTube or the stream, we cannot resolve the package tree differently on different systems. Like if we create one tree on one system and a different tree on a different one, that is a nightmare. Because we have to lock both, potential trees. It's not clear which one we're going to be using at any given time. Like all determinism goes out the window if we do that. So if you don't have a lock file, there's no determinism anyway. So who cares? This is greenfield.
But explicitly greenfield. But explicitly greenfield it's not greenfield. You've already solved this by sorting, right? Which you've addressed. So
yeah, so that is, I think, a bug, and we should just fix that bug. We shouldn't be defaulting to the latest version if the latest version is allegedly not going to work for you. I say allegedly because a lot of times people have aggressive engines fields just because they don't feel like dealing with it. And, I cannot fault them on that. I do that.
Okay, I took down 2 action items. So relaying that this isn't something we want to support, but provide the alternatives and back. Discussion, as well as took the action of we're going to remove the logic to sort based on the matching engines versus using just latest. Is that right, Isaac?
Yeah.
Okay. Did anybody else have any comments on this specifically? I know the variants and distributions is something that we can bring up at a later date. Once we have like an RFC potentially for that, it's something that we can at least discuss. But going back to what Isaac just said, yeah, I think it makes sense that you don't want to be creating different log files, but you might be reifying different packages, which already happens today, right? The idea of like optional dependencies are being installed for folks to support different platforms, I think, is how people are falling back to that behavior today.
Oh, one other thing I wanted to mention. This is pretty far afield from what's been requested in this RFC, but Jordan, to your question of, I've got version 1 works with this range of ESLint and version 2 works with this other range of ESLint, and I want to be able to just say to people like, look, you can install, my thing at star, and you'll get the one that works with the ESLint that you have.
Well, it's more like, so my plugin has a peer dependency on ESLint 6 or 7, which means I don't care which version of ESLint they have either one. But what I want to say is I want a dependency on 2 different versions of this package, depending on which ESLint version they've chosen. So I don't want them to have to peer depend on this thing. I can explicitly depend on it, but I know that like ESLint 6 needs to be 2 and ESLint 7 needs to be 3. I don't want them to have to know that or think about it or deal with it.
So that in an ideal world, right? So you have your thing, your like plugin has a peer dependency on ESLint 6 or 7, and then library at version 1 depends on ESLint 6, and library at version 2 depends on ESLint 7.
Yep.
And
or,
you want
or peer depends. Yeah.
peer depends, right? And you want to take library version 1 or 2, and then get the one that works with the ESLint that is being pulled
Yep.
in. This is essentially the same. I think that's the same shape as the React DOM problem, where you have
Yes.
you have two things in your tree. One of them depends on React 16. The other one depends on React DOM at 16 or 17, and React at 16 or 17. Now, if you and React DOM at 16 peer depends on React at 16, React DOM 17 peer depends on React at 17. You can get yourself into a state then where we think that React DOM 17 is the one that we need to pull in for that dep, because it's the latest and greatest and everything looks wonderful about it. But then it conflicts, and it's not a conflict that we see an easy way to resolve, right? We have to like walk back up the dependency resolution tree.
Well, but you're talking about the challenges from trying to figure out this information. I'm saying I'm happy as the package author to explicitly tell you that this is what I want. If the user has ESLint 6, just pick V2, and if it doesn't work, fail the whole thing, and just pick V3 if they have ESLint 7, and so on.
Right. So in a perfect world, you should just be able to say, I can use
right.
2 or 3, right? And we should be able to then say,
True.
okay, well, 2 doesn't work with ESLint 7, and I have ESLint 7 and I can't get rid of it. So let me roll back and try 3, or whatever, vice versa.
Or vice versa, yeah.
So, but we're not currently tracking those sort of extended conflict rules and then reevaluating. That is something that is, I would like to do. Again, like that's like in a perfect world, that would make a lot of React users happy. The workaround now is the root project has to specify what version of that library they need to pull in. And it's a little bit of a, we're sort of putting some of the package resolution work on the user, which is not our goal.
Yeah. Just in
so we can
be mindful of time. Yeah, let's move on. So PR 396, this is peer dependencies should be able to match full range of pre-release versions. I feel like this is going to be pretty quick. I'll share the RFC in chat for folks. I believe this got opened a couple weeks back, actually. Card, did you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, right in there, they admit this is going to be effectively the only way to do this was just change the semver spec. This is just not how pre-releases work.
Yeah, so yeah. I was the one that wrote the RFC here. So yeah, I wasn't too. That was the only thought I had. It'd be nice if it could work, but it seems like potentially, after I made it, it seemed like potentially maybe it's not how pre-release versions should actually work. Oh, sorry, it's not how peer dependencies should be used. Like this particular use case potentially isn't a case for peer dependencies.
Did you want to flesh out the use case a bit, Alistair?
Sure. So I'll give maybe the ESLint example. And it depends how ESLint in this case would be developed. So you have so if you're the developer of ESLint, let's say, and you want to work on a new version, and you're using pre-releases for the main ESLint package, and then you have plugins which depend on those versions of ESLint. So for example, you've got ESLint 4, for example. And you have a plugin that depends on, as a peer dependency on ESLint 4. What will happen is that if someone releases ESLint 4-0, for example, or 4-1, and they keep releasing these pre-release versions as they go along, that peer dependency, that plugin will no longer match the peer dependency of ESLint, even though it's obviously going to work with it. So that basically means that either semver has to change, or we can't use peer dependencies because it's just totally broken on npm 7, and you've got to use the legacy legacy peer deps, which obviously isn't the recommended way forward. We obviously need a way forward to decide where to go on that.
Go ahead, Gar.
So this is more of a problem of during development, right?
It could be, yes. Yeah, it's either during development. So in my case, our obviously I'm not an ESLint developer, but in our module, we're developing internally. We're testing plugins that are already released with our module, and it'll just break while we're developing. But there are the cases where these pre-releases are potentially public, so other people want to test them in a more open source module. Other people might want to be able to install like a new version of ESLint, test it out. Maybe they're a plugin developer themselves, and then you've got your problem.
So the problem being solved here is, hey, I need to install things and include pre-releases because, yeah, I'm testing
against that pre-release version. Yeah.
It seems like regardless of sort of pre-releases per se, this feels like an interesting problem with it. Like basically what you're saying is there are cases where you want to allow pre-release version. Sorry, it's not like peer deps per se. There's cases where you want to be able to install a thing that with a range that includes pre-release deps, right? Where we sort of flip on that include pre-release flag in Node.js. There's options for that. One of them is, yeah, so staged publishes does come to mind. We have an RFC that's like, it's not super high priority on the registry side. They have plenty of big fish to fry. But it is sort of on the long-term roadmap. And the CLI support for it is all there. There's two ways I can imagine. There's sort of the blunt way and the challenging way. The blunt way would be we add a flag in NPM called include pre-releases. And if you do that, then every Semver check that we do just includes pre-releases. So you get it. It's like very all or nothing. Very straightforward. It's already just a flag we can pass through to Node.js, so we would just do that everywhere. The second thing, and we only actually check for Semver ranges in one place when we're picking the manifest, so it's not even that many places we need to go and update. The downside of that is then you're going to get all pre-releases everywhere, right? If you run npm update -- include pre-releases, you're going to get a whole lot of stuff maybe that is actually broken. The other thing, as ZB, you're Nogtur, right? As that was suggested in the chat, we have a new addition. You know, we could add a new addition to the Semver range syntax, where we have a new character that is, you know, or some way to kind of in that dependency specifier say this one. Okay, cool. I got the right name. So this one can be, you know, can include pre-releases. And doing that, it's kind of maybe good news, bad news, is that the Semver range spec is actually not specified outside of just a couple of implementations of it. And all the implementations are slightly different anyway. So if we add something to it, it's like not that big a deal. It really only affects us, but that is the more difficult one, just because that's I don't know, more useful and expressive, but also has much more chance of side effects. And when we get something into the, you know, if we update the range syntax and then somebody publishes a package with that range, now it's not installable by versions of npm that don't understand that range. They'll see it as an invalid Semver range potentially, which may be good. I don't know. That may actually be a feature rather than a drawback. So yeah, those are kind of the two ways we could go. And if we do it with the blunt approach of an npm config, you can still you can target what you're installing. You can say npm install foo at 1.x -- include pre-releases, and you're only going to get pre-releases for that thing and its, you know, child nodes. So
I'm not sure that I'd quite solve it though, because we're not actually we don't actually want, for example, so in the ESLint example, we don't actually want it to pick up a specific version of ESLint that's already been predefined. It's when npm tries to resolve the peer dependencies and tries to map. It realizes, for example, you plug in peer depends on 4, for example, 4-0. The pre-release is already installed, and then it tries to install the one that matches the peer dependency. So you end up with either 2 versions, one overrides the other, or you get some sort of compatibility error.
Right, because you need the pre-release, but the other thing depends on a specific version, not including the pre-release.
Yeah, or there's no way of saying that it includes a pre-release, like because that goes back to the Semver point. There is no way of actually matching every version within a major minor patch range that includes all pre-releases within that range.
Right.
It's only within that exact version.
Yeah. We could another way to crack this might be to have an option in package JSON that says these are the dependencies that I will allow pre-releases on. And so you could say, all right, well, this plugin that has a peer dependency on something could just say I allow pre-releases of that peer dependency. So you kind of opt into all of them. That would be a little bit. That could also be a config item, but it would be more targeted if we put it in the package JSON, because then it's basically the package author explicitly sort of opting in.
I mean, and it sounds like peer dependencies meta would be a good place, since this is kind of a unique problem with peer dependencies.
Yeah, unless you want to do some integration testing with a dedupe dependency.
So
right.
Wes, I see you have your hand up, and then I just want to time box this because we have 2 other items and I want to make sure we get to the last one. So feel free to comment, Wes.
Yeah, so specifically on this problem if we're scoping that the problem here is a during development problem, not I want to go to my broad user base with a install please pre-release version of your package. I have used dist tags for this similar scenario here. It's not a great user experience right now, but it's, again, because it's scoped only to I want to test this set of packages together. So basically what I would have done is I will depend on the dist tag directly in the package JSON. That means that if I'm publishing on that dist tag with a series of pre-releases, all I have to do is either update my lock or run without a lock for a little bit during development. And I just end up getting continually the new pre-release versions, because all I'm really specifying is the dist tag. And from a development standpoint, I actually think that's better, because you don't want a Semver range of pre-releases. You want this one pre-release that we just published that we have to lock into, because explicitly in Semver, those pre-releases could contain breaking changes. You can't really say that you want to accept all pre-release in a production scenario. You can only do that in development. And at that point, I don't see a strong reason not to just improve the UX around depending on dist tags as an alternate to this.
Maybe it becomes slightly more complex then. I wasn't necessarily suggesting that all dist tags get pulled. It was something like the caret or the tilde syntax right now, but including dist tags, so you wouldn't get breaking changes if you wanted version 4. Allow everything that's version 4, including pre-releases, and then you'd kind of get that compatibility. Basically, your plugin works with every version, future and past, and in the middle.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think I understand where you're going at. I was trying to take sort of a different course to support the development and testing use case. Because again, I think anytime you go to a main release, right, a 1.0.0 as opposed to a 1.0.0-1, you now, if you include, depending on a pre-release, you are in a locked state right? You have locked that dependency to a single version, and you have locked it to a version that is explicitly not ready for production use. So I don't think that you ever want to publish a main version where you depend on a pre-release version of one of your dependencies explicitly. I think you might want to depend on a disk tag that will move forward with some development, and that even on the public registry, I'd say that's pretty iffy. I mean, that's like for me on par with like a production dependency, depending on a Git dependency. Like that has caused tons of problems in my experience from debugging. And
the other one, and I think Wes, you're right. I've done this. The enzyme React 16 adapter still supports via peer dependencies React 16.0 pre-releases, and must do so until I make a breaking change to drop it. Obviously, I will drop it as soon as I make a breaking change, but you know, it is very undesirable to explicitly be supporting pre-releases publicly.
And in that case, the user experience, to me, while it's not super great, is probably, again, incentivizing better behavior. So the user experience there is you have to do 1.0.0-1 or 1.0.0-2, right? And like, to me, that extra hurdle is really there probably incentivizing better behavior out of module authors at the risk of, obviously being verbose and painful, but again, should only be used in development. And at that point, some compromise, I think.
So I'm just gonna quickly interject and say we have about 10 minutes left. So I'm hoping we can, Wes is getting blown away, and Jordan, I think you also have spotty internet today. But I think we were able to hear everything you were getting at. I'm trying to take as best notes as I can, but feel free to add notes and comments back to the RFC itself. I think we should leave this open at least for another week if you're okay with coming back, Alistair, to continue talking about this and sort of the options that we have available to you, and maybe also like what we can do. Including, what Isaac spoke to in terms of like an include pre-releases flag is one option. It sounds very similar to ideas that we floated also with include staged when I spoke about the fact that we had almost like a similar concept ideated about a year or two ago. Gar, I see your hands up. I'll give you the last word on this, and then hopefully we can move forward.
I would just ask Alistair to type out their use cases as much as they're comfortable making the specifics public in there, so we can have a discussion in the comments there. So we can make sure we're solving the problem and not, because sometimes we get, too locked into an implementation and we forget the problem we're being solved. So I would really love to hone in on the problem we're trying to solve for you. And, if that's the right way, that's fine.
Yep.
Awesome. Thanks for that. The last two issue RFC 420. Don't expand tabs by default. I'm not sure if that user is here on the call. I might punt this to next week.
I actually just commented on that.
Great.
So we preserve indentation in package lock and package JSON. The one way we could maybe tackle this is just create an indent in EOL config items, and if those are present, then npm init will use them.
Yeah, I was having an internal conversation with Luke Keres on our team about formatting as well, and he's potentially going to submit an RFC for essentially configs for package JSON formatting, since we've introduced the npm pkg set of commands. Some folks have asked us whether or not we'll provide config to format package JSON specifically. I think this lines up with what you just suggested, Isaac. So I'll hopefully get Luke to circle back on that. Wes, I see your hands up.
Yeah, well, I'm totally a fan of providing this option, and I don't think it makes too much of a difference. This is specifically one of the features I was hoping we'd land in the package init. library that we were working on in package pkgjs, because I think there's, yeah, anyway, I think this is where we start to stray into like the, well, do we have to add a new feature to NPM just to support every like use case? I know this one's pretty popular and so it makes sense. But I think that, a more robust init experience is probably a better long-term than continuing to add features like this to NPM directly.
Yeah, I think it's just that when we go and touch package JSON, how we leave it, it's like we don't have any indication of how you want your package JSON to be left, and we are already doing certain things to it.
Yeah, that's sort of what I meant. With like, fixing those seems great. Right. That's why I'm sorry. That's what I tried to mean by when I said I'm not opposed to this addition and like the way this is working. I just meant the more robust problem here is like people have opinions about how they want those files written. Maybe they have order of keys that they want and like stuff like that. That, I mean, I think that would just be a long-term maintenance nightmare to try to accommodate.
Oh my goodness, we're not going to have tabs for spaces comments in the chat right now. I can't let this degrade to that level. We can't do that.
So the key ordering would actually be pretty straightforward. The JSON stringifier that we use for package JSON and package lock JSON both accept a list of the keys to prioritize.
So my hand is raised not for that, but for.
Oh.
Go ahead, Jordan. You cut out, and I think you're muted.
Cut out. Yeah, now he's muted.
I just don't know if I'm scratchy.
Yeah, I think I get what Jordan's saying. I agree that we don't, if people want a init added to, that's fine. This is kind of a deeper issue of like how we write to all these files, and the init would just be benefiting from it.
Yeah. So I just want to try to get to the last item, at least give it 5 minutes here. If folks have any other comments, feel free to leave them there in the RFC itself. The last item that we have here, 422, the audit assertions that Tierney has put together was a last minute addition. It only got created today, and I know that he wanted to get on the agenda, so feel free to queue this up.
Yeah, there's been a large amount of discussion already. TLDR, this is a mechanism for counterclaims in NPM audit. This was largely spurred by discussion with Dan Abramov prior to his blog post. It's basically just a proposal for a counterclaim method. One thing I will say is that it's intended at being consumed by maintainers. There's some nice suggestions in there. I think that having third parties also be able to make claims is a cool thing that could happen. It shouldn't happen initially, I don't think. But yeah, there's some stuff there. Please take a look. If folks have stuff they want to say, feel free.
I think it's worth making this like the only thing on the agenda for next week.
Oh, Jesus.
I mean, no, I'm serious because
I agree. Have we done a deep dive in a while? I feel like this is the next like deep dive topic.
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah, it's huge. There's also some stuff that that was shared that I got pointed at that I'd want to kind of bring into this conversation around discussions related to this at a more general, like not NPM specific level. There's a whole specification standards body project going on to specify vulnerability exchange extension, something VEX. And that's that also then is sort of a way to specify like, here's this vulnerability, here's a note about it, here's how to know if you're affected by it or not. And we could piggyback on a lot of that and provide a much better experience for NPM audit users. I think that the big thing is probably what's probably going to have to change is it's not just a Boolean. It's, like what I've seen, I mean, very recently is you are vulnerable to this if you are calling this particular method. And if you're not, you kind of don't have to worry about it. And so we can provide some additional context for package authors to make the correct decision there. We can also have a big discussion about how to validate these things and, you know, who to allow. Are you just turning it off because you're sick of people posting issues on your repo, or are you turning it off because you're actually not vulnerable? Like, so I think this is super juicy, and we might be able to pull in even some of the security folks who are not typically on these calls because they don't do JavaScript specifically.
Yeah, I want to apologize,
Have a lot
Mike,
to add.
who joined the call, Mike McDonald here, who's been kindly waiting this whole time. Hopefully will join us again.
I'll happily come back next week. I'm sure there are some good conversations going on in the issue as well. So it's been fun.
Thank you so much. Actually, do you want to quickly introduce yourself before we break, so folks know who you are now and in the future?
Hey everyone, my name is Mike McDonald. I've been doing developer tools at GitHub for about 6 months, working on Dependabot. And then prior to that, I was the first PM at Firebase and worked on Google Cloud serverless things. So I worked with Miles actually quite a bit in the past. So very excited to work with you all. I think this is a super interesting and fun problem to solve. So happy to come back.
Awesome. And Wes, did you want to have one final note before we?
Yeah, can I give a quick plug for the collab space? So this specific topic is going to be still the primary one we want to tackle in the collab space first up. So I don't know if everybody's familiar, but Darcy and I put together a little introduction to what it is. It's on YouTube. I can find a link to it. We had our sort of setup meeting, and then we are working on planning the next, but I think we were going to do bi-weekly, and I go on vacation for 2 weeks next week. So I don't know if we're going to have one until I get back at least. But it's an OpenJS collab space, specifically targeting package vulnerability reporting and remediation. So if we can work on, like Isaac, you mentioned some specifications that are being, shopped around at the, sort of industry-wide layer. I think having conversations about how those apply to JavaScript would be excellent. I think, especially if we can get a good plan for how we're going to both interface with those groups and make sure that we have a seat at the table and that whatever they end up formalizing will work well in the JavaScript space, since we have it probably the worst off. Additionally, I think we should maybe take Tyranny's proposal here and add it to our agenda over there for our first meeting, to talk about how this can work in NPM, and if there's things that specifically scope to NPM like this RFC does, or if there's things that we need to be discussing at a higher level. Maybe Mike, you not typically working on JavaScript specific stuff, that's sort of where we see the collab space helping us have a longer discussion period, a place that can own that. Because if it's in the NPM repo, we're talking JavaScript specific, and we're going to make some decisions there that I think are going to work really well and optimized for the JavaScript use case. But I think that might miss the forest for the trees, or I don't know how we want to phrase that, but basically, if we don't think about this in a broader context, we may make some short-term worse decisions for just the JavaScript ecosystem. And I just want to make sure we recognize that there's a lot of parallel work happening here, and we should make sure that we don't forget totally about the specification process for a counterclaim and then implement something and then have to go and change the whole ecosystem, in a year or two, to adopt a larger specification. So anyway, we're over time, and I know I'm rambling there, but check out the collab space.
Yep, I'll add links in the notes. And thanks everybody for jumping on. Hopefully see you next week. And I'll try to post the agenda early next week, just so folks know it's probably going to be a deep dive on this area for sure. So thanks everybody, and we'll see you next week.